they talk about something called Rudra Hridaya Upanishad. What does this Upanishad tell you? I'll read the line. Uma Shankara Yogo Yah Sa Yogo Vishnu Ruchyate. Uma is basically Shakti. Shakti means what? Shakti means the ability to do something. Uma is the incarnation of Shiva's ability to perform everything. And the manifestation of that Shakti is only Vishnu. So Vishnu is a subordinate entity in Orthodox Shaivism, subordinate to Shiva. So Shaivas did not have a problem worshipping Vishnu. The next line itself of this Rudra Hridaya Upanishad says, Atmanam Paramatmanam Antaratmanam Evacha Jnatva Trividhamatmanam Paramatmanam Ashrayet. It is Shiva only who takes the form of Vishnu in one way and takes the form of Brahma in one way. Rudrat pravartate bijam bija yonir janardanaha yo rudrasa svayam brahma yo brahma sa hutashanaha. The Shaiva believes that Rudra gives rise to the seed of creation and Janardana, Vishnu, is the person who preserves that seed and brings it into shape. And it is one form of Rudra only that turns into Brahma, and that Brahma takes that shape to further completion. It is Brahma who and Vishnu who preserve and keep the cycle of preservation and creation constantly ongoing. Now, if you notice, there is a fundamental break from what Vedavyasa taught. Vedavyasa's orthodox Vaidika Vaishnavatva, it does not have this kind of concept of a Trimurti per se. Because in Vaishnavism, the destroyer of everything is also the same Sriman Narayana. The creator is also Narayana. The preserver of everything is also the same Sriman Narayana. Albeit he gives positions of various devatas to Brahma, to Vishnu, to Brahma, to Shiva, etc., etc. It is ultimately he who does the process of creation and destruction. Whereas this concept of a separate manifestation of a particular Shakti of one almighty being coming into existence and that taking a shape of its own, that is something very, very new. It does not exist in any of the orthodox Vaishnava matas. There, Vaishnavas and Shaivas are extremely different. Secondly, in the orthodox Vaishnava sampradayas, Shiva is subordinate to Vishnu. Shiva is a Jivatman who is created, a Jivatman who will live in the form of a Deva, in the form of Rudra Deva for a particular period of time. And the Jivatman will vacate that Devata Pada, and another Jivatman can come over there. The Devata Pada remains the same. The position remains the same. The occupants keep changing. That is all. Vyasa viewed Shiva, Brahma, all other Devas other than Vishnu. For the Shaiva, it is kind of an inversion of the same thing. But Shaiva does not consider Vishnu as someone not worshipable. So back in those days itself, if you see the Sthala Puranas of various temples in Pandya Nadu and in Chola Nadu, you will see that some members of the family of the same Chola king were themselves Vaishnavas. Some Chola kings were all great Vaishnava bhaktas. They therefore built various Divya Desas, whereas some Cholas were more bent on worshipping in the Shaiva way. So they built more Shiva temples, but fundamentally, the Shaivas worshipped Vishnu in a slightly different sense. Orthodox Vaishnavas would not worship Shiva in the same sense. So the way in which a Shaiva would, the possibility of a Shaiva visiting a Vishnu temple is much higher than, I'm talking about in those days in the beginning of Kaliyuga. Possibility of a Shaiva visiting a Vishnu temple is much higher than a Vaishnava visiting a Shiva temple. In fact, a Vaishnava visiting a Shiva temple back in those days would have been zero. Vaishnava Agama is such. But there's a peculiarity even then. You are allowed to, as a Vaishnava, worship Shiva as an Acharya within your temple. A practice that went out of fashion after a period of time. Likewise, in a Shiva temple, you are allowed to, a Shaiva is allowed by his scriptures to worship Vishnu as a manifestation of Parvati's Shakti. In this way, there was some kind of one kind of a religious handshake between the two sides was there, which is why Shaivas and Vaishnavas kept coexisting for most of history. For the average Samana, both of these were antithetical to his very core belief system itself. Now, when we talk about Jainas and Bauddhas, we have to talk about the Samanas, the Avaidikas. We have spoken enough about Vaidikas. We will talk about the Avaidikas now. In the case of the Avaidikas, namely the Bauddhas and Jainas, they overtly reject the four Vedas. They have nothing to do with Sanatana Dharma. They have a totally different set of belief systems itself. One that begins with, when we look at both Jainas and Bauddhas, well, let's look first at the Bauddhas. Their primordial belief system, the most fundamental system of belief that guides even today the majority of the schools of Buddhism, whatever school they may be, is a concept known as Shunyata. Shunyata means nothingness, emptiness. Most orthodox compilation of Buddhist scriptures that are accepted by almost all schools of Buddhism even today, whether it's Shingon Buddhism of Korea or whether it is Theravada Buddhism of Sri Lanka, the Pali canon with its various subdivisions, it has various Nikayas, it has various sutras. Inside those Nikayas, you have so many other subdivisions of various stories, various moral discourses, various agamic discourses. Some of them will even tell you ways in which a Buddha should conduct worship. Shunyata or emptiness basically tells you that nothing exists. For a Buddha, nothing exists. Whereas for a Jaina, things exist. Okay. Fundamental difference between a Buddha and a Jaina is for a Buddha, everything is an illusion. For a Jaina, not so. But what is the biggest similarity between the both of them? Both don't believe in God. They both are Nastikyavada. Buddhas believe in only something called an emptiness and the realization of that emptiness. Most primordial Buddhas. So when you see the Sri Bhashya Sukta of Bhagavad Ramanujacharya, or when you see Bodha in Vritti or Vedavyasa's Brahma Sutra, they will also mention Buddhas in them. But which Buddhas do they mention? They primarily mention four schools of Buddhas only, which have existed for all of history. All other Buddha schools being derived from those four schools. What are the four schools? Sarva Shunyavada, Madhyamika, Vaibhashika, Sautrantika. The four primordial schools of Buddhism. Sarva Shunyavada being the oldest. Now, Sarva Shunyavada, it not only says everything is void, empty, and nothing exists, it also says that there is something called conscience that eternally has existed, and the conscience is not something that physically can exist. It is a psychological state of being, a state that has always been in place. That is what Sarva Shunyavada essentially preaches. Sarva Shunyavada goes to various levels of realizing this emptiness. It says that a monk who has renounced everything, his family, all his material belongings, he must only sit and concentrate on realizing this emptiness. He must concentrate on realizing this emptiness. Realizing this emptiness, he will attain a state that the Buddha currently has attained. That is the state of nirvana. So no materials, no physicality of anything really exists for them. Everything around them that's going on is actually an illusion. And that illusion, it's and that illusion, it is basically only a state of psychological being. Now, for a Buddha, for an average Buddha, the idea of physically worshipping an entity, that is against his religious beliefs. So he is not supposed to physically offer worship to anything per se. It's only Shunyavada school. Now Shunyavada had to be developed into something else. This is what the Buddhists themselves believe, that Gautama Buddha in one of his previous incarnations as Bodhisattva, in one of the previous Bodhisattvas, he preached this. So Gautama Buddha is not the founder of Buddhism. Like how Adi Shankara is not the founder of Kevaladvaita, Gautama Buddha is not the founder of Buddhism. It existed even before him, and the Jataka tales of Buddhism itself corroborates this. They believe that Gautama Buddha existed in various rebirths before his own time in various forms. Various other Buddhas have also existed who came to reveal the same thing from time to time. Now, the disciples of Adi Buddha had to, Adi Buddha, first Buddha, they had to develop on the idea of Shunyavada in some way. They therefore came up with the idea that something called Jnana and Dharma exist. What is Jnana and Dharma? If nothing exists, Jnana and Dharma, how they can exist? The definition of Jnana is basically enlightenment. Enlightenment of what? Of knowing this emptiness, of knowing this void, that in reality there is only a void. There is nothing, nothingness is the only reality. That which leads you towards that is Jnana. Whereas what is dharma? Now their definition of dharma is entirely different. Now Sanatana Dharma's definition of dharma is that which the Vedas says, right? Yes. Whereas Buddha's definition of dharma is any psychological activity is a dharma. And a set of those activities fall under a set of dharmas known as an abhidharma. Their very definition of dharma is very, very different. A state of conscious being that impels that conscience to take part in a conscious activity that is called a dharma. So for a Buddhist, dharma has nothing to in reality do with righteousness per se. It is an action undertaken, and these there can be various, infinitely various kinds of dharmas that are undertaken in these states of consciousness. Madhyamika developed on this. Madhyamika's greatest proponent was an Indian monk known as Nagarjuna. Now, the identity of Nagarjuna is unknown. It's very, very unknown. We don't know how he developed Madhyamika. Did he develop Madhyamika using something like Advaita? Did he develop it using pure Buddhist scriptures? Will not be known. Now, towards the what was you can say towards the turn of the first 2000 years or so of Kaliyuga, when it was first 2 to 3,000 years was passing, right? This Madhyamika also evolved into something further, and that visibly started coming in late in a very textually recorded way. Two other forms of Madhyamika, Vaibhashika, Sautrantika came out. Not two forms of Madhyamika, two forms of orthodox Shunyavada only. Vaibhashika expanded a little more on the Jnana aspect of Madhyamika, whereas Sautrantika went to the level of saying that everything is not an illusion, everything exists but for a moment. It exists and it stops existing, it exists and it stops existing. That is what Sautrantika believed. Vaibhashika went to the extent of saying things do have a past and things do have a future and a present, but those things don't exist as things, they exist only as consciences. Sautrantika went to the extent of saying those things do exist, albeit for a moment. Now, the Jainas believe something very similar to this. However, the Jainas don't believe in illusionism at all. The Jainas believe in something such as there is karma, there is reality, that things are getting created, but there's no God. Everything comes because of karma. There exists a physicality of existence. Things do physically exist. And those who reveal this from time to time are various Tirthankaras. There's the way Bauddhas are Bodhisattvas, Jainas are Tirthankaras. Bauddhas and Jainas, in fact, a lot of a lot of the first in the first 5 to 6,000 years of Kali Yuga's history, the middle part of the history, that is something like 2,500 years ago to present day, a lot of it has been shaped between the mutual animosity between the Jainas and Bauddhas of the Indian subcontinent towards each other. Now, why is it that these two very similar sounding doctrines, why do they hate each other? Because one believed in Mayavada and they considered reality, Astitva, to be something very sinful to even believe in. One believed in the infallibility of Bodhisattvas, whereas the other believed in the infallibility of Tirthankaras. And the biggest rival to the Bauddha and Jaina movement were each other. The biggest rival to the Bauddhas were Jainas, and the biggest rival to Jainas were Bauddhas. Right from the very beginning, when you see the Majjhima Nikaya, when you go into the life of various Buddhist monks like Maudgalyayana, you will see that there has always been an attempt, right from the very early ages of Kali Yuga, to start converting the various rulers to Bauddha or Jaina Mata. In that light, Tirujnana Sambandha story from Sekidar's Periya Puranam, it says that a Pandya king who had fallen prey to a very, very major disease, his superstitious mind was played upon and a group of Jainas converted him. Likewise, if we see in the Guru Parampara tradition of Sri Vaishnavism, Jainas had converted the king of Melkote to Jainism. Now, what was the immediate after effect when a king converted to Bauddha or Jaina? Bauddha and Jaina, remember, are fringe groups. They don't even live in cities. One of the most overt manifestations which Buddhist sources like Ashokavadana themselves corroborate is that they will close down all the Vaidika temples in that place. They'll completely close it, they will seal it shut, they might even break it. In the Brahmajala Sutra of the Majjhima Nikaya, Gautama Buddha preaches that once a king of a land becomes a Buddhist, all superstitious beliefs like singing of Vedas should be stopped. Those who wear the sacred thread should be removed from that land, and all their temples should be closed down. If necessary, they should be destroyed also. Brahmajala Sutta, this is called. Basically gives you a a very detailed overview of how exactly a Buddhist society must be established by political force. But when Tirunjana Sambandha came to the Pandya country and he was able to reconvert the king back to the Shaiva Mata by exhorting to his faith. And when the king came back to the Shaiva Mata, and when he finally came and saw the level of damage that the Jainas had done, both to society as well as to religious infrastructure in the land of the Pandyas, he ordered the mass execution of whichever Jaina could be found in that land. This kind of reprisals between rival political groups was very, very common also, you can say, in those days in Kaliyuga. It's not even it's not a conspiracy theory or something that's been floated around. These are all very, very documented and corroborated. In Periya Puranam, however, the killing of the mass killing of Jains is not corroborated. It is corroborated in another Shaiva Puranam, Thiruvilayadal Puranam, in which the famous movie Thiruvilayadal is based. So early kings of Bharatavarsha, they really did not know which religion to lean to. There were very few kings, if any at all, who had a firm religious grounding, because most kings, as we see at the end of Bhagavata Purana and Mahabharata, they started leaving Sanatana Dharma and embracing these religions more and more. So to conclude, to conclude today's session, Bharatavarsha's three broad divisions were two kinds of Vedikas and one group of Avedikas. And they had clean social distinctions between each other, clean community level distinctions between each other, practice level distinctions between each other. They had very clearly defined. They had their own scriptures. They had very clean distinctions even in temple practices. But one common thing between two of those three groups, Avedikas and Shaiva Vedikas, was for a very large part of the first 5,000 to 6,000 years of Kaliyuga, they always were in a constant race to ensure that their religion is uniformly implemented across the land. So this is basically our introductory. I'll conclude our introductory session to how Kaliyuga used to look. So in conclusion, we will see further in the next session onwards what kind of practices these individual schools used to undertake. At a social level, what kind of life, we saw already what kind of life Shaiva and Vaishnava Vaidikas used to live. We need to see what the Avedikas used to live. What are the political dynamics of that era? What are all mentioned about what the kings did of those days, how their religious views evolved, and as time passed by, who are all the various saints who even became politically powerful, like Tirunjana Sambandha, for example, or Tirumangai Alvar, what all they have done. What typically used to be the kind of worship that Buddhists and Jainas used to undertake in various parts of Bharatavarsha? Why is it that so many stupas are not existing today? What exactly started happening within the schools of Bauddha and Jaina? We will start seeing that from the next session onwards. Now, word of advice for everyone: all these sessions will be like edited. They'll be published on our YouTube channel. So be sure to follow our channel. I'll be sending the link for our channel in our group. If you have any feedback,